Katie Couric is revealing a recent health scare that caused her to experience short-term memory loss.
She wrote about it on her Substack, calling it, quote, "the day I'll never remember." In it, she describes a recent Saturday, a couple Saturdays ago, when she was in Colorado.
The mountain air of Aspen is crisp, but inside the festival hall, the atmosphere is suffocating. 1 minute, she is commanding the stage with the effortless charisma that defined American broadcasting for decades. The next, a terrifying void swallows the room. At 69, a sudden, inexplicable darkness erases the present, leaving a legendary mind trapped in a loop of confusion. It is a chilling reminder that even the most enduring icons are fragile. This is what exactly happened in that haunting afternoon. That daytime stood still. The morning of June 27th, 2026.
Former CBS Evening News anchor Katie Couric, she revealed in a Substack post this week that she was diagnosed with temporary amnesia. Couric says the incident resembled a stroke and she couldn't recall the year or even recent events.
Began with the deceptive normalcy that prefixes most life-altering shifts. In the picturesque mountain town of Aspen, Colorado, Katie Couric went about a routine that felt perfectly fitting for an icon of American lifestyle journalism. She took a crisp morning walk into town, wandering through the local farmers market. She bought iced coffee, fresh peaches, nectarines, and a casual straw hat. She returned to where she was staying, ate breakfast with her husband, John Molnar, and picked out her outfit for the afternoon. She was in town to do what she has done flawlessly for 4 decades: command a crowd, ask sharp questions, and anchor a room. Molnar drove her to the Aspen Institute campus. Right before arriving, they talked about stopping at a local hot dog stand for lunch. That conversation about a hot dog stand is the absolute last anchor point of Katie Couric's memory for the next several hours. Beyond that line, her mind plunged into an immediate, pitch-black void. What makes this episode so profoundly unsettling is that while Couric's internal recorder completely shut down, her external shell kept functioning with terrifying precision. She walked onto the festival stages. She sat under the bright lights. She moderated a high-stakes, deeply technical panel discussion on artificial intelligence. Immediately after, she transitioned to a second panel, dissecting the complex future of modern journalism. To the hundreds of audience members watching from the seats, she was the exact same Katie Couric who had anchored the Today Show and CBS, sharp, engaged, and entirely articulate. Molnar, sitting in the audience, watched her closely and noticed absolutely nothing unusual in her demeanor, her speech pattern, or her cognitive flow. The illusion finally shattered the moment she stepped off the second stage. As she paused to mingle with lingering audience members, a sudden wave of disorientation hit her. An alert intern noticed she was looking completely out of it and frantically tracked down Molnar. By the time her husband reached her side, the woman who had spent her life processing complex global news in real time was fundamentally unraveling. During the frantic car ride to Aspen Valley Hospital, the severity of the crisis became undeniable. Couric could no longer process basic reality. When Molnar and the intake medical staff asked her simple, grounding questions, the answers she provided sent a chill through the room. She was entirely unsure of the current month. She confidently stated that the year was 2024. When asked who was currently occupying the Oval Office, she answered that it was Joe Biden. Most devastatingly for her family, her short-term memory loop had shrunk to a window of mere minutes. As doctors and nurses rushed around her, Couric repeatedly reintroduced herself to the exact same medical staff every single time they walked through the door. She had entirely forgotten the names of her grandchildren, and the name of her daughter Carrie's boyfriend was wiped clean from her mind. Observing a legendary communicator unable to retain a single sentence, the attending physician turned immediately to the staff and issued a chilling directive: initiate stroke protocol. The next few hours were a grueling gauntlet of emergency diagnostics. Couric was rushed into an MRI machine to scan for blood clots, brain bleeds, or permanent neurological tissue damage. For her family, the wait was agonizing, trapped in the terrifying assumption that a catastrophic stroke was erasing the mind of an American titan. But when the imaging results finally came back, they brought a staggering wave of medical relief. There was no sign of a stroke. There was no hemorrhage, no tumor, and no physical trauma. Instead, neurologists handed down a rare, deeply bizarre diagnosis: transient global amnesia, or TGA. TGA is a temporary, non-destructive neurological malfunction that primarily targets adults between the ages of 50 and 80. For reasons science still cannot fully quantify, the brain's save button, located in the hippocampus, temporarily loses its ability to encode new short-term memories. The patient can speak, walk, argue, and recognize long-term faces, but their mind is writing on water. Every passing minute is instantly deleted. The condition is often triggered by sudden emotional shock, intense physical exertion, or abrupt changes in temperature, though it can strike completely out of nowhere. By 9 p.m. that Saturday evening, the neurological glitch spontaneously resolved. The save button clicked back on, and Couric's cognition steadily flooded back until she was fully anchored in reality again. By the following morning, she was completely herself, showing no lingering cognitive deficits, no permanent brain damage, and no elevated risk for future strokes or dementia. Today, she is completely healthy, fully active, and running her media empire with her signature vigor. Yet, that entire Saturday afternoon remains a permanent ghost in her biography. She is back to writing her future, but those specific hours under the Aspen lights are a blank space she will simply never remember. Did this sudden, terrifying lapse in the mountains mean that a lifetime lived under the unforgiving high-stress glare of the public eye had finally exacted its ultimate toll? America's sweetheart and the dawn of a media titan. Long before she was a household name, Catherine Ann Couric was a relentless, high-energy package from Arlington, Virginia. Born into a household where words mattered, her father, John Martin Couric Jr., was a veteran print journalist and news editor. She grew up with an innate respect for the ink and the airwaves. She chased that passion straight to the University of Virginia, writing for the campus paper, the Cavalier Daily, before graduating in 1979. Armed with an American Studies degree and an uncompromising work ethic, she didn't just enter the world of broadcast news. She kicked the door down. Her initial steps into television were a masterclass in paying dues. She started at the absolute bottom, serving as a desk assistant for the ABC News Bureau in Washington, D.C., running coffee and copy under legends like Sam Donaldson. But static desk jobs could never hold her. When a brash, unproven concept called the cable news network, CNN, launched, Couric jumped ship, grinding away as an assignment editor and producer. She bounced from Atlanta to Miami, eventually landing at NBC's local affiliate WRC-TV in Washington, where her sharp reporting began earning regional Emmys. By 1989, network executives could no longer ignore her sharp instincts, hiring her as a deputy Pentagon correspondent for NBC News. When she covered the U.S. invasion of Panama, her ability to break down high-stakes military maneuvers with effortless clarity caught the attention of the highest offices at Rockefeller Center. Then came 1991, the year that changed the trajectory of American morning television forever. NBC's flagship morning broadcast, The Today Show, was trapped in a tailspin. A disastrous, poorly handled anchor transition had alienated millions of loyal viewers, and the show's ratings were plummeting. When permanent co-host Deborah Norville went on maternity leave, a fresh-faced, energetic Couric was tapped to fill the empty chair alongside the formidable, often intimidating, Bryant Gumbel. The chemistry was an immediate lightning-in-a-bottle phenomenon. Where other journalists of the era felt stiff, detached, and overly formal, Couric brought a vibrant, conversational warmth that felt less like a distant news anchor and more like a trusted neighbor who happened to be incredibly well-informed. By April 1991, the network made it official. Katie Couric was the permanent co-anchor of Today. Almost overnight, the phrase "America's sweetheart" was permanently attached to her name. But that sugary moniker obscured the fiercely brilliant journalistic operator underneath. Critics and rivals frequently made the fatal mistake of underestimating her based on her sunny disposition, her quick wit, and her famous ready smile. They assumed she was only suited for the soft lifestyle fluff of morning television, cooking segments, celebrity profiles, and light-hearted banter. They were profoundly wrong. Couric systematically redefined what a morning anchor could do. She aggressively negotiated for an equal share of hard-hitting newsmaker interviews, refusing to be relegated to the secondary position. When she sat across from politicians, world leaders, and corporate titans, her cheerful veneer morphed into a surgical weapon. She would smile warmly, lean in, and deliver devastatingly direct, unevasive questions that left seasoned Washington power brokers stuttering on live television. From her sharp interrogation of First Lady Hillary Clinton during the height of the Whitewater controversy to her real-time coverage of the Clarence Thomas Supreme Court confirmation hearings, she proved she could trade blows with any political journalist in the business. Under her stewardship, Today didn't just recover, it soared. In 1993, the broadcast systematically dethroned ABC's Good Morning America, seizing the #1 spot in the Nielsen ratings, a position it would fiercely maintain for more than a decade. Couric became the undisputed queen of morning television, pulling in millions of viewers who refused to start their days without her. She was a fixture of the American morning routine, guiding the country through cultural milestones, Olympic Games, and national tragedies. Her career was a relentless, multi-million-dollar locomotive of success, operating at a breakneck pace that required total mental acuity every single morning at dawn. Yet, just as she reached the absolute pinnacle of professional triumph, the universe brutally reminded her that no amount of fame, ratings, or network power could shield her from the devastating fragility of human life. The crucible of public grief. There is an unspoken, brutal tax that comes with being the person a nation wakes up to every morning. When your brand is built on unfiltered empathy and radiant optimism, you are expected to carry that light regardless of the shadows in your own life. For Katie Couric, the late 90s and early 2000s turned that expectation into an almost unfathomable psychological crucible. While she was busy anchoring the top-rated morning show in the country, maintaining the illusion of absolute stability for millions of viewers, her private world was systematically being dismantled by tragedy. The first and most devastating fracture occurred in 1997. Her husband, Jay Monahan, a brilliant TV legal analyst, a devoted father, and the man she had built her life with, began suffering from persistent fatigue and severe abdominal pain. The diagnosis was a catastrophic blow, stage 4 metastatic colon cancer. He was just 41 years old. For 9 grueling months, Couric operated in a state of hyper-vigilant duality. By morning, she was the smiling, flawlessly composed co-host of the Today Show, guiding the public through the news of the day. By afternoon, she was a frantic medical researcher and caregiver, navigating hospital corridors and watching the father of her 2 young daughters, Ellie and Carrie, slip away. Jay Monahan died on January 24, 1998. The grief was staggering, played out under the unrelenting microscope of the American paparazzi. Yet, rather than retreating into private isolation, Couric made a radical decision that would alter the landscape of public health journalism forever. She realized that Monahan's death was entirely preventable. Colon cancer was highly treatable if caught early, but public squeamishness and a lack of awareness kept people from getting screened. In March 2000, she turned her private agony into a historic public broadcast. Couric walked into a medical center and allowed television cameras to film her undergoing a live on-air colonoscopy. It was an unprecedented, deeply vulnerable moment for a major television anchor. She stripped away the glossy veneer of stardom to demystify a taboo medical procedure. The impact was immediate and statistically staggering. In the months following the broadcast, colonoscopy screenings surged by over 20% across the United States. Researchers and public health officials officially dubbed this phenomenon the Couric effect. Her willingness to expose her own body to the cameras quite literally saved thousands of American lives. But the universe wasn't finished testing her resilience. Just as the rawest edges of her grief over Monahan were beginning to scar, tragedy struck again. In 2000, her beloved older sister, Emily Couric, a fiercely intelligent, rising star in Virginia politics who was widely expected to run for governor, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Once again, Couric found herself thrust into the terrifying role of the protector, helpless against a terminal diagnosis. Emily fought a gallant 15-month battle, but on October 18, 2001, she passed away at the age of 54. To lose your husband and your sister to aggressive terminal cancers within a 3-year span would crush the psychological baseline of almost anyone. For Couric, the losses were compounded by the timing. Emily's death occurred just weeks after a period of national tragedy. As America reeled from collective trauma, Couric was forced to anchor hours of live, emotionally draining international crisis coverage while carrying a fresh, profound weight of personal bereavement. She channeled her grief into macro-level advocacy, co-founding the National Colorectal Cancer Research Alliance and later Stand Up to Cancer, an organization that revolutionized how cancer research is funded and accelerated. These years forged a new dimension to her identity. She was no longer just the cheerful morning host. She was America's chief mourner and its most resilient advocate. She had looked absolute devastation in the eye, bared her soul to the public, and somehow kept moving forward. But when she decided to take the biggest, most expensive professional gamble of her entire life, she would discover that the public's deep love affair with America's sweetheart began to dangerously fracture. The $15 million gamble. By 2006, Katie Couric had spent 15 years reigning supreme over morning television, but the confines of the Today Show set began to feel like a golden cage. She had conquered the morning, but the holy grail of broadcast journalism, the solo anchor chair of a nightly network evening news broadcast, had remained an exclusively male fortress. When CBS News came knocking with a historic, groundbreaking offer, it was a siren song she could not ignore. They offered her a staggering $15 million annual salary, complete editorial control, and the title of managing editor and solo anchor of the CBS Evening News. On September 5, 2006, she made history as the first solo female anchor of a major network's flagship nightly newscast. The gamble, however, immediately walked into a buzzsaw of institutional sexism and ferocious media scrutiny. The public, it turned out, loved America's sweetheart when she was pouring their morning coffee, but a vocal segment of the country recoiled when she attempted to tell them how to think at dinner time. The backlash was swift, petty, and deeply gendered. Media critics spent less time analyzing her editorial choices and far more time dissecting her wardrobe, her hair, the exact shade of her jackets, and even the way she sat in her chair. Tabloids mocked her legs and questioned whether her sunny morning energy could ever translate to the gravitas required to report on war, economic collapse, and geopolitical strife. Traditional evening news viewers, accustomed to the stern paternal presence of figures like Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, resisted the shift. The ratings for the CBS Evening News plummeted to third place, and Couric found herself stranded in an isolating professional wasteland, enduring a daily public flogging from industry insiders who eagerly predicted her demise. Yet, true to form, Couric refused to fold. She dug in, leaned heavily on her deep reporting background, and waited for the moment the news cycle would allow her to do what she does best: cut through the political noise with clinical precision. That moment arrived in September 2008, in the heat of a historic presidential election. John McCain had shocked the political world by selecting the relatively unknown governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, as his vice presidential running mate. Palin was a cultural phenomenon, electrifying the conservative base, and the mainstream media was struggling to get an unscripted, extended interview with her. CBS secured the exclusive. What followed over a series of days in late September was arguably the most consequential, multi-part political interview in modern American history. Couric did not adopt a hostile, aggressive tone. Instead, she used her signature style. She smiled warmly, remained exceedingly polite, and asked incredibly basic, open-ended, journalistic questions. She asked Palin what newspapers and magazines she read to establish her worldview. Palin stammered, unable to name a single specific publication, offering instead the vague defense that she read all of them. Couric asked her to explain her specific foreign policy experience regarding Russia, given Alaska's proximity. She asked about the nuances of the Bush doctrine and the multi-billion-dollar Wall Street bailout. On camera, the vice presidential candidate fundamentally unraveled. Couric's quiet, persistent refusal to let Palin escape with talking points exposed a profound lack of policy depth that altered the trajectory of the 2008 presidential race. The interview won Couric the prestigious Walter Cronkite Award for Journalism Excellence and silenced her critics overnight. She had proved, on the grandest possible stage, that her journalistic teeth were as sharp as anyone's in the business. Despite the editorial triumph of the Palin interview, the structural rot of traditional network evening news could not be reversed by one anchor. The entire media landscape was fracturing. Younger audiences were abandoning appointments with the television at 6:30 p.m. in favor of instantaneous digital feeds. Couric's 5-year tenure at CBS was a grueling marathon that yielded exceptional journalism, including on-the-ground reporting from the devastation of the Haitian earthquake and the battlefields of Iraq, but it never achieved the ratings dominance of her Today Show glory days. In 2011, she stepped down from the anchor chair, having broken the glass ceiling but carrying the heavy scars of a medium in terminal decline. As the traditional television networks began losing their grip on the American consciousness, how does a legacy icon survive when the ground beneath her feet moves entirely to the internet? Reinvention in the digital age. When the traditional television network infrastructure began to splinter, an entire generation of legacy broadcasters faced an existential crossroads: fade into the comfortable obscurity of elder statesman status, or adapt to a terrain where the rules were being rewritten in real time. For Katie Couric, entering her late 50s and early 60s meant executing one of the most radical structural pivots in modern media history. She recognized long before her contemporaries that the era of appointment television was dead. The future belonged to direct-to-consumer digital ecosystems, where the gatekeepers were bypassed entirely. Her initial foray out of the nightly news capsule was a transitional bridge back to her roots. In 2012, she launched Katie, a syndicated daytime talk show with ABC. While the program allowed her to return to the conversational, long-form human interest storytelling she had mastered on the Today Show, the traditional syndication model felt increasingly archaic. The show lasted 2 seasons, but the corporate bureaucracy and rigid scheduling constraints only solidified her desire to break free from network television entirely. In 2014, she made a move that sent shockwaves through the industry, signing on as the global anchor for Yahoo News. At the time, mainstream media executives viewed the jump from a major network to an internet portal as a massive step down. But Couric saw the horizon. At Yahoo, she was untethered from the tight 22-minute constraints of the evening news. She conducted sprawling, real-time interviews with world leaders, tech disruptors, and cultural icons, pioneering a hybrid style of high-production digital journalism that laid the foundation for the modern streaming era. By 2017, she realized that even working for a digital conglomerate wasn't enough. She needed total ownership of her intellectual property. Alongside her husband, John Molnar, she founded Katie Couric Media, KCM. This wasn't just a production house. It was a nimble, multi-platform powerhouse designed to meet the modern audience exactly where they lived, in their earbuds and their email inboxes. KCM began partnering with purpose-driven global brands to produce premium documentaries, digital video series, and deep-dive reporting focused on systemic social issues, gender equality, and public health. The crown jewel of this digital empire became her hit podcast, Next Question, with Katie Couric. On Next Question, she completely shed the rigid objective mask enforced by decades of network guidelines. Listeners were introduced to a more candid, introspective, and entirely unvarnished version of Couric. She used the fluid, intimate nature of the audio format to unpack complex political landscapes, interview heavyweights like Maggie Haberman on the shifting mechanics of the presidency, and lead deeply personal public health conversations. Simultaneously, she launched her daily newsletter, Wake Up Call, transforming the traditional morning news roundup into a highly intimate conversational email that felt like an extension of her morning show personality delivered straight to millions of smartphones. By the time she fully entered her 60s, Couric had successfully engineered a stunning corporate transformation. She was no longer a piece of talent hired to front a network's brand. She was the network. Her Substack platform became a booming hub for media critique, lifestyle journalism, and interactive community building. She even launched the Katie Couric Book Club, hosting monthly, highly engaging live conversations with acclaimed authors like Ann Patchett. She had effectively decoupled her authority from the physical towers of Rockefeller Center and CBS, proving that her connection with the American public was entirely independent of a television screen. Yet, taking total ownership of her narrative also meant peeling back the polished veneer of her legendary past, a move that would drag long-buried television industry secrets and bitter rivalries directly into the blinding light of public judgment. The backlash, the memoirs, and the critics. When an icon spends decades smiling through the lens, the world begins to mistake the performer for the performance. For 30 years, Katie Couric was bound by the unwritten laws of network television: remain palatable, absorb the punches, maintain the harmony, and never let the audience see the machinery grinding behind the set. But as she entered her mid-60s, the desire to protect the institutional illusions of television evaporated. In October 2021, she dropped an editorial bombshell onto the media landscape with the release of her brutally honest, unvarnished memoir, Going There. The book was a calculated, deliberate shattering of her own stained glass image. Couric didn't just write a retrospective, she took a blowtorch to the myth of the cozy, cooperative morning television family. The immediate fallout centered around her raw, unapologetic revelations regarding the ultra-competitive, often toxic ecosystem of network news. In the most controversial chapters of the book, Couric admitted that during her reign at NBC, she intentionally protected her turf from rising female reporters. She wrote candidly about feeling threatened by younger talent, including Ashley Barbanfield, admitting she didn't roll out the red carpet because she felt the network was always looking to replace older women with newer models. While male anchors had historically guarded their territory with ruthless aggression without a whisper of public pushback, Couric's transparency sparked a ferocious wave of public backlash. Critics rushed to label her as catty, unsupportive of other women, and calculating, ignoring the systemic, cutthroat reality of an industry that deliberately pitted women against each other for a solitary seat at the table. Even more explosive was her handling of the downfall of her longtime Today Show co-host, Matt Lauer. For over a decade, Couric and Lauer had been the gold standard of morning television chemistry, a partnership that drove billions of dollars in advertising revenue. When Lauer was fired in 2017 amid horrifying allegations of sexual misconduct, Couric had remained largely silent, processing the wreckage privately. In Going There, she finally laid bare the agonizing, deeply complicated anatomy of betrayal. She published raw text messages between herself and Lauer, tracking her journey from initial disbelief and protective instinct to utter revulsion as the full scope of his predatory behavior came to light. She described him as a professional brother who possessed a dark, compartmentalized side she had failed to see, leaving readers with a chilling portrait of power and complicity inside Rockefeller Center. The book didn't spare her time at CBS either. She took aim at the entrenched, old-guard patriarchy of the evening news division, naming executives and producers who she felt had actively sabotaged her transition or treated her as a glamorous interloper rather than a seasoned journalist. The retaliation from her former colleagues was swift and venomous. Industry insiders leaked negative stories to tabloids. Former co-workers publicly distanced themselves from her, and prominent media critics questioned whether her candidness had permanently damaged her legacy. She was accused of burning bridges simply to sell books. But for Couric, the project wasn't about maintaining industry friendships. It was about historical corrections. She was tired of the public consuming a sanitized, fictionalized version of her life. She wanted the world to know the exact psychological cost of being America's sweetheart in a world run by sharks. Navigating this intense wave of public scrutiny required a profound degree of emotional skin. Couric found herself in the bizarre position of being both the premier storyteller of her generation and the subject of its most biting critiques. Tabloids that had once chronicled her grief with sympathy now dissected her personal ambition with a clinical sharpness. Yet, The backlash ultimately proved her cultural durability. While lesser figures would have been cancelled or forced into a defensive retreat, Couric leaned into the friction. She went on extensive book tours, stood by her words in grueling interviews, and used her digital platforms to engage directly with the criticism. She proved that at this stage in her life, she was no longer seeking permission to be heard. With the smoke finally clearing from the explosive revelations of her past, what does the road ahead look like for a woman who has lived entirely, unreservedly, in the public eye? The horizon, life ahead, and final reflections. At 69, Katie Couric remains completely uncurtailed by the passing of time or the terrifying, fleeting glitch in the Colorado mountains. Rather than retreating into quiet retirement, she continues to steer her multi-platform digital empire with the exact same unyielding momentum that characterized her early days at NBC. From leading her booming Substack book club alongside literary giants to exploring deep structural issues via Katie Couric Media, she has successfully proven that an anchor's authority does not belong to a network boardroom. It belongs entirely to the audience she has spent a lifetime building. Her vulnerabilities, much like her triumphs, are woven directly into the fabric of the American story. If you enjoyed diving into the complex, resilient, and fascinating journey of Katie Couric, make sure to hit that subscribe button below so you never miss another deep dive biography script.